Good evening, my little dreamers. Welcome to another magical night where stories come alive. My name is Lady Novelist, and tonight we're about to journey to a world where anything is possible, where heroes are born, adventures await, and dreams take flight. Before we begin, I want you to take a deep breath in and slowly let it out. Feel the day's worries float away as if they were leaves drifting down a gentle stream. This is your time now. A moment just for you to unwind, to relax, and to let your imagination soar. As I tell you the story, let the words paint pictures in your mind. Don't worry about remembering everything. Just let the story wrap around you like a cozy blanket. Close your eyes if you like, or just rest and listen. This is your getaway to a peaceful, magical world. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Tonight's story is called The Stable Boy and His Princess. Chapter 1: The Forest Kingdom. Jasmine swung her legs over the sturdy branch of an old oak tree, her bare toes brushing against the cold bark. A crown of wildflowers rested lopsided on her head, the purple and yellow petals a striking contrast against her raven-black hair. Below her, Bob leaned against the tree trunk, his curly auburn hair sticking out in all directions. He was busy tying a makeshift fishing hook to the end of a long stick. The small stream nearby sparkled in the late afternoon sun, its gentle gurgling a soft accompaniment to their laughter. "Do you think this will work?" Bob asked, holding up the contraption, his freckled nose wrinkled in concentration. Jasmine squinted down at him, grinning. "If we catch a fish with that, I'll let you have the first bite of dessert tonight." Bob's face lit up. "Pudding?" he asked, hopeful. "Pudding," Jasmine confirmed, although she wasn't entirely sure what the castle's cook, Bob's mother, Hilda, had planned for the evening meal. That wasn't important. For now, they were free, far from the stifling walls of the palace and its endless rules. Bob waded into the stream, his boots squelching in the mud. Jasmine climbed down to join him, her dress already smeared with streaks of dirt and grass stains. It was one of her older frocks, allowed for these excursions, and she'd taken full advantage of its unofficial play status. "Hold still," Bob muttered as he crouched near the water's edge, positioning his stick. "Fish are smarter than you think. You can't scare them off." Jasmine suppressed a giggle. "Smarter than you, maybe." Bob turned to retort, but a sudden splash cut him off. He yelped as the water soaked his trousers, and Jasmine doubled over with laughter. "You did that on purpose," he accused, shaking a wet sleeve at her. "I did not," she replied between giggles. "The fish must really like you, Bob. Maybe you should make friends with it instead." They spent the next hour trying and failing to catch anything more than reeds and fallen leaves. By the time they gave up, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting golden light through the trees. The woods felt alive, vibrant, and endless. For Jasmine, it was a sanctuary, a place where the constraints of her title melted away, and she could simply be herself. "Let's go to the clearing," she said, already running ahead. "Wait up," Bob called, his shorter legs struggling to keep pace. The clearing was their favorite spot, a sunlit patch of grass surrounded by towering pines. Wildflowers grew in abundance here, and the fallen log served as their imaginary throne when they played make-believe. Today, however, Jasmine flopped down onto the grass, staring up at the sky. Bob joined her, chewing on a blade of grass and gazing at the clouds. "Do you ever think about running away?" Jasmine asked suddenly. Bob turned his head to look at her. "Run away? Why would you want to do that? You're a princess. You've got everything." She shrugged, plucking a flower and twirling it between her fingers. "I don't want everything. Not the way it is now. My father, he doesn't even see me anymore. He only talks about alliances and treaties and expectations." Bob frowned. He wasn't sure what to say. He'd seen the king only a handful of times, usually from a distance. To him, the man had always seemed larger than life, stern and commanding. Nothing like the warm, playful friend lying next to him now. "Well," he said after a pause, "if you ever do run away, I'm coming with you. Someone's got to make sure you don't get lost." Jasmine smiled, her heart lighter. "You'd be a terrible guide, Bob. You can't even find your way back to the kitchen without help." "Hey," he protested, throwing the grass blade at her. She retaliated with a handful of petals, and soon they were rolling around, laughing and wrestling in the soft grass. By the time they made their way back to the castle, the stars had begun to appear. Jasmine and Bob sneaked in through a side door, their muddy clothes a testament to their adventures. Hilda was waiting for them in the kitchen, arms crossed and eyebrows raised. "Look at the state of you two," she scolded, though her voice held more exasperation than anger. "Jasmine, your governess will have my head if she sees you like this." Jasmine ducked her head, feigning guilt. "Sorry, Hilda." Bob wasn't as quick to apologize. "We were catching fish," he said proudly, holding up the stick with the now bent hook. Hilda shook her head. "Fish, huh? What did you catch?" "Nothing," Jasmine admitted, her grin returning. "But we had fun." Hilda sighed, ushering them toward the wash basin. "Go clean up, both of you. And Bob, don't think you're getting out of peeling potatoes tonight." Bob groaned, but Jasmine's giggles made it easier to bear. Later that night, Jasmine sat by the window in her small chamber. The room was modest compared to the grand halls of the palace, but she preferred it this way. Outside, the moon hung high, casting a silver glow over the courtyard. She thought about her father, the king, and the way he'd barely acknowledged her at dinner. His focus had been on a visiting nobleman, discussing some trade agreement she didn't understand. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Bob, carrying a small plate with a slice of pudding. "Thought you might want this," he said, setting it on her desk. She smiled up at him. "Thanks, Bob." He lingered for a moment, then leaned against the door frame. "You okay?" Jasmine nodded, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "Yeah, just thinking." Bob didn't press her. He knew when to let her be. "See you tomorrow," he said, closing the door behind him. Jasmine sat in silence, staring out at the night sky. She didn't know what the future held, but as long as she had Bob and the woods, she felt like she could face anything. Little did she know the world she knew was about to change forever. As the first star winked at her, Jasmine made a silent wish that the simplicity and joy of days like this would never end. Chapter 2: The Forbidden Bond. The forest hadn't changed much over the years, its towering trees still forming a cathedral of green, its streams still sparkling like liquid silver. But Jasmine and Bob had changed. At 17 and 18, they no longer splashed about in the mud or raced barefoot through the woods. Their games had matured into long conversations about life, whispered secrets, and the occasional bout of spirited banter. Still, the forest remained their sanctuary, a place where they could escape the burdens of their worlds and simply be themselves. Jasmine's crown of wildflowers had been replaced by a simple braid, but her dark hair still tumbled freely over her shoulders. She leaned against an ancient oak, her amber eyes glinting in the dappled sunlight. Bob stood a few paces away, fiddling with a carved whistle he had been crafting for days. His broad shoulders and confident stance betrayed the boyish clumsiness he had outgrown, but his freckled face still softened whenever he looked at Jasmine. "Play it already," Jasmine teased, tilting her head. "Let's see if all the effort was worth it." Bob grinned and raised the whistle to his lips. A high, clear note filled the air, followed by a cheerful melody that danced through the forest. Jasmine clapped her hands, laughing. "It's beautiful. You're a regular minstrel now." "Don't let Hilda hear that," Bob replied with mock seriousness. "She'll have me playing at the next royal banquet." Jasmine wrinkled her nose. "Banquets. I can't stand them. Too much pomp, too many rules. And too many suitors." Bob added, his tone light but his eyes shadowed with something deeper. Jasmine sighed, kicking at the soft moss underfoot. "Don't remind me. Every one of them is more insufferable than the last. Father seems determined to marry me off like some prize cow." Bob's jaw tightened. "You're not a prize. You're—" He hesitated, then met her gaze. "You're Jasmine. You deserve more than some political match." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Bob took a step closer. Jasmine's breath caught as his hand brushed her cheek, his touch warm and tentative. "Jasmine," he murmured, his voice barely audible. And then he kissed her. It was a soft, hesitant kiss at first, but as Jasmine responded, it deepened into something fierce and consuming. The world seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of them, their hearts pounding in unison. When they finally broke apart, Jasmine's cheeks were flushed, and Bob's eyes shone with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. I shouldn't have, Bob began, but Jasmine silenced him with a finger to his lips. Don't, she whispered. Don't apologize. I've wanted this too. A smile spread across Bob's face, and for the first time in days, Jasmine felt truly at peace. But even as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a sliver of unease crept into her heart. Their love was beautiful but fragile, a secret that could shatter their world if revealed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered promises. Jasmine and Bob became experts at slipping away from watchful eyes, their love growing stronger with each encounter. But the joy of their newfound bond was overshadowed by the storm brewing in the palace. The king had announced a grand ceremony to welcome Prince Caleb, the son of the neighboring emperor. It was no secret that this was more than a mere diplomatic visit. The union of their kingdoms had been discussed for years, and now it seemed inevitable. Jasmine's heart sank as she watched the preparations unfold, the palace buzzing with excitement. She wanted no part of it. On the day of the ceremony, Jasmine stood in her chamber staring at her reflection. Her gown was a masterpiece of silk and embroidery, the golden fabric shimmering with every movement. Yet she felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Bob, dressed in his finest, but looking just as uncomfortable as she felt. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Jasmine shook her head. "I'll never be ready for this." Bob stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to go through with it," he said fiercely. "We can run away, Jasmine. Leave all of this behind." Her heart ached at the thought, but she knew it wasn't that simple. "I can't abandon my people, Bob. Not like this. But I won't let them decide my fate either." The ceremony was a grand affair, the great hall filled with nobles, diplomats, and courtiers. Jasmine's father stood at the head of the room, his regal presence commanding attention. Beside him was Prince Caleb, a handsome but haughty young man who seemed more interested in his reflection than in Jasmine. When the time came for Caleb to speak, he stepped forward, his voice ringing out confidently. "Princess Jasmine, I have come to propose an alliance between our kingdoms. Together we can usher in an era of peace and prosperity." Jasmine's father beamed, clearly expecting her compliance. But as Caleb extended his hand, Jasmine stepped back, her voice steady and resolute. "I refuse," she declared, her words echoing through the hall. A stunned silence fell over the room. The king's face darkened with fury. "Jasmine, this is not a request. You will accept his proposal." "No," Jasmine said firmly. "I will not be used as a pawn in your schemes." The tension in the room was palpable. the air thick with unspoken words. But before the quarrel could escalate further, a deafening roar shattered the silence. The crowd turned toward the windows as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Through the great doors burst a three-headed dragon, its massive wings blotting out the sun. Panic erupted as the creature let out another ear-splitting roar. With a sweep of its tail, it knocked over tables and sent people scattering. Jasmine stood frozen as one of the heads lunged toward her. Before she could react, the dragon's claws closed around her, lifting her into the air. "Jasmine!" Bob's voice rang out, but he was powerless to stop the beast as it soared out of the hole, carrying Jasmine away. The king's fury was replaced by desperation as he turned to the assembled crowd. "Whoever can rescue my daughter will have her hand in marriage and half the kingdom," he proclaimed. The room erupted into chaos as knights, adventurers, and opportunists clamored to volunteer. But amid the frenzy, Bob slipped away, his heart set on one thing: bringing Jasmine back, no matter the cost. Chapter 3: Wings of Freedom. Bob couldn't sleep. The castle had never felt so empty without Jasmine's laughter echoing in the halls. He tossed and turned in his modest room near the kitchens, her last cry for help replaying in his mind. A three-headed dragon. It was like something out of the old stories Hilda used to tell them by the fire. But this was real, and Jasmine was gone. With a sigh, Bob sat up and swung his legs out of bed. If he was going to rescue her, he needed to start now. Quietly, he slipped into his boots, grabbed his leather satchel, and made his way to the stables. The heavy wooden doors creaked as he pushed them open, revealing rows of horses, their ears flicking at his intrusion. Among them was a chestnut stallion Bob has known since he was a boy. It was the Emperor's horse from many years ago, retired after countless battles. The old steed's intelligent eyes met Bob's, and he felt a strange sense of determination. The horse stepped forward, its hooves clinking against the stone floor as if answering an unspoken call. "I don't know where to start," Bob admitted, running a hand down the horse's neck. "But you're strong. Will you help me?" To his surprise, the horse snorted and gestured toward a shelf with its muzzle. Bob followed its gaze and found a dusty jar sitting among the tools. It looked ordinary, but when he picked it up, the horse's ears pricked forward with anticipation. "You want this?" Bob asked, holding it up. The horse nodded, actually nodded, and Bob's jaw dropped. He unscrewed the lid and poured the contents into his palm. It was a golden, shimmering paste. Hesitantly, he held it out, and the horse licked it up eagerly. A moment later, the stallion began to glow, its body shimmering with light. Bob stumbled back as the horse transformed before his eyes. Massive wings unfurled from its sides, their feathers as white as snow. The horse's voice, deep and resonant, filled Bob's mind. "I am Alarion, guardian of the skies. You have freed me, young one. Now let us find your princess." Bob stared wide-eyed. You can talk. The winged horse, Alarion, nodded. Climb onto my back. Time is of the essence. Bob didn't need to be told twice. He swung himself onto Alarion's back, clutching the mane as the horse trotted out of the stable and into the moonlit courtyard. There, the Emperor and several guards were waiting, alerted by the commotion. The Emperor's stern face softened when he saw Alarion. So, the legend was true, he murmured. Turning to Bob, he said, "If you can bring my daughter back, boy, you will have my blessing," and her hand. Bob nodded, determination hardening his features. "I'll bring her back," he promised. Alarion spread his wings wide, and with a powerful leap, they soared into the sky. The castle quickly disappeared beneath them as the wind rushed past Bob's face. For the first time since Jasmine was taken, hope bloomed in his chest. Together, they would face whatever dangers lay ahead. For Jasmine, he would go to the ends of the earth. Chapter 4. The Battle for Jasmine. The dense forest stretched out endlessly below as Alarion soared through the skies. Bob clung tightly to the winged horse's mane, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The thought of Jasmine kept him focused. They had to find her, and fast. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon, Alarion began to descend, his powerful wings slicing through the morning mist. Below them, a crooked house made of stone and timber came into view, nestled in a clearing surrounded by gnarled trees. "That is the witch's home," Alarion said, his voice resonating in Bob's mind. "She may help us or hinder us. Tread carefully." Bob nodded, sliding off Alarion's back as they landed. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and smoke. He hesitated at the warped wooden door before knocking. "Who dares to disturb me at such an hour?" came a sharp, crackling voice from within. The door creaked open, revealing a hunched figure draped in layers of tattered black and gray fabric. The witch's eyes gleamed like polished obsidian as she peered at Bob, then at Alarion. "What business does a stable boy have with me?" she sneered. Bob straightened, summoning his courage. "I'm here to save Princess Jasmine. She's been taken by the three-headed dragon. I was told you could help." The witch let out a dry cackle. "And why should I help you, boy? Do I look like a dragon slayer?" Bob held her gaze, trying to keep his voice steady. "Because you have the knowledge, and because helping me means saving not just the princess, but the people who depend on her. They say you're wise. Prove them right." The witch tilted her head, intrigued. "Flattery will get you nowhere, but clever words might." She stepped aside, motioning him in. "Enter." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of strange spices and burning wood. Shelves crammed with jars and books lined the walls, and the cauldron bubbled ominously in the corner. Bob stood awkwardly as the witch shuffled to a chair. "So, you want to slay the dragon," she said, eyeing him skeptically. "That beast has terrorized these lands for centuries. Many have tried, and all have failed." "I'll succeed," Bob said firmly, "but I need to know how." The witch tapped her chin thoughtfully. "The dragon's heads are its strength. and its weakness. All three must be severed within a single minute, or they will regenerate. It is a task of precision and speed. Bob's stomach tightened. The challenge was daunting, but he nodded. "Thank you, I'll do it." The witch smirked. "You need more than determination, boy." She turned to Alarion. "And you, winged one, do you truly believe this stable boy can defeat such a foe?" Alarion's wings twitched. "I believe in the strength of his heart," he replied. The witch's expression softened, though her voice remained sharp. "Then I suppose I must come along. You'll need my magic to keep you alive." Bob blinked. "You'd really help?" The witch grabbed a small satchel and slung it over her shoulder. "I've been waiting for a challenge. Besides, if you'll fail, I'd rather not have a three-headed dragon coming after me next." They flew for hours, the witch riding behind Bob on Alarion's broad back. The wind whipped past them as the landscape changed from dense forest to jagged mountains. Soon they reached a dark valley shrouded in mist. At its center loomed a massive cave, its entrance scorched black from dragon fire. Alarion landed at the edge of the valley, his muscles tense. "This is as close as I can go without alerting the beast," he said. The witch dismounted, scanning the area. "We'll have to move quickly. Remember what I said, 1 minute to sever all three heads." Bob nodded, gripping the sword he'd brought from the castle. The blade felt heavier now, the enormity of the task settling on his shoulders. They crept toward the cave, the ground trembling faintly beneath their feet. Inside, the air was thick and hot, and the walls glowed faintly with the reflection of firelight. The dragon lay coiled in the center, its three heads resting on its massive claws. Each head was adorned with rows of jagged horns, and smoke billowed from its nostrils. Bob's breath hitched. The beast was even larger than he'd imagined. "Ready?" the witch whispered, pulling a vial of shimmering liquid from her satchel. "This will buy you a few seconds of distraction." She hurled the vial toward the dragon, and it shattered on the ground, releasing a burst of blinding light. The dragon roared, its head snapping up in unison. Bob charged forward, sword raised. Alarion swooped in from above, his wings beating furiously as he drew the dragon's attention. The battle was chaos. The dragon's claws raked the ground, sending rocks and debris flying. Alarion darted and weaved, keeping the heads occupied while Bob focused on his target. The witch chanted spells, her hands glowing as she conjured barriers to deflect the dragon's fiery breath. Bob managed to sever the first head, the sword slicing cleanly through the thick neck. The dragon howled in pain, its remaining head slashing out wildly. Alarion swooped down, raking his hooves across one of the heads to distract it. "Two more!" the witch shouted, hurling a bolt of energy that struck the dragon's flank. Bob lunged for the second head, dodging a fiery blast just in time. The blade struck through, and the head fell with a sickening thud. The final head reared back, its eyes blazing with fury. "Now, Bob!" Alarion urged, diving low to shield him from the dragon's claws. Summoning all his strength, Bob leaped onto the dragon's back, climbing toward the thrashing head. The witch sent another spell flying, and the beast hesitated just long enough for Bob to strike. The final head toppled, and the dragon collapsed with a thunderous crash. The cave fell silent, save for Bob's racked breathing. The dragon's massive body began to disintegrate, turning to ash that was carried away on the wind. "We did it," he whispered, disbelief and relief washing over him. In the back of the cave, they found Jasmine chained to a stone pillar, her dress tattered but her spirit unbroken. Her eyes widened when she saw Bob. "Bob!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. He rushed to her, cutting the chains and pulling her into a tight embrace. "I promised I'd find you," he said softly. Jasmine clung to him, her voice trembling. "I knew you would." The journey back to the palace was joyous. The witch and Alarian stayed behind at the edge of the forest, the horse bowing gracefully. "Our paths part here," Alarian said. "There is more evil to vanquish, and my work with the witch has just begun." The witch smirked. "Try not to get yourself killed, stable boy." Bob grinned. "Thank you for everything." Back at the castle, the emperor wept with joy at Jasmine's return. True to his word, he gave Bob his blessing to marry Jasmine, and the kingdom celebrated the union for days. Though their lives would settle into peace, Bob and Jasmine would never forget the friends who helped them, or the courage it took to triumph over the impossible. As for Alarian and the witch, their adventures continued, their names whispered in legends of their own. Dear friends, our story came to an end. I hope it brought a touch of magic to your evening and carried you closer to the land of dreams. May your sleep be deep and peaceful, and may the adventures of Bob and Alarian linger gently in your imagination. If you're still awake and enjoyed tonight's tale, I warmly invite you to like this story and subscribe to my channel. Together, we can share more journeys, more wonder, and more stories to carry us into the night. Good night, my dear listeners. Sweet dreams.